Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today I'm pleased to welcome one of the most renowned and respected men behind the scenes in Hollywood and on Broadway. His sparkling career as a production designer and art director spanned over half a century. He worked on over 400 television shows, including the most iconic shows of our generation, with the biggest stars including everyone from Bing Crosby to Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Elvis, Cher, Madonna, and countless others. He designed 10 Academy Awards shows, 27 American Music Awards, 10 American Film Institute tribute shows, and 7 Miss America pageants, earning 3 Emmy Awards and 8 Emmy nominations. He designed the sets for 9 Broadway shows featuring legends like Bea Arthur, James Earl Jones, Lauren Bacall, and Liza Minnelli. He's here to discuss his fascinating new book entitled Behind the Scenes, Hollywood to Broadway. I'm delighted to welcome Ray Klausen to our show. Ray, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you so much.
Ray, I have to tell you that I absolutely loved your book. I couldn't put it down. I know you started keeping journals in 1976 when you worked on the Andy Williams show. Did you think back then that you might write a book one day?
Not a clue. Not a clue. You know, when you first start out in the business, you cross everything and hope you get lucky and that things come your way, but there's no guarantee. I know in the beginning, I was so nervous that they would stop asking me to do shows that I could never really relax. And then one day I sat down after maybe 15 years and I said, you know what, Ray, you've had 2 days of unemployment. Maybe they kind of like your work. So from then on, I tried to relax and enjoy it. But no, in terms of thinking I would ever end up with, I think it's 425 shows that I've designed. I had no idea that that would happen. And I'm so incredibly grateful. I was just in the right place with the right timing. With God knows I had the best education for this sort of work.
I'm fascinated that you were able to so quickly decide that you wanted to be a set designer, all because your school teacher, Mrs. Dwyer, took you to see Lil Abner on Broadway. What was it that inspired you to want to be a set designer?
I'd like to say it was the character Appassionata von Climax, who had the most fabulous breasts, Tina Louise. And years later, Alvin Colt, who had designed that show, was at dinner, and I told him the story about how I was sitting up in the balcony looking down at her cleavage and poking a buddy of mine and saying, that's the business for me. And Alvin said, you have no idea how hard I had to work to give her any cleavage at all. See, so it's all deception. It's all theater.
You wrote that, and I'm quoting you here, great design has its origins in the world around us. It extends beyond one's work and into how one lives one's life. What did you mean by that, Ray?
Wow, that's a complicated question. And I suppose, I don't know, the way I was trained at Yale was to look at everything and to absorb it and make it part of who you were. We had a class one day where Donna Lowenstock, who was a top Broadway designer who was training us, passed around a box of shells. And he said, everyone take one shell. And when we all had our shells, he said, okay, now go home and design Ring Around the Moon based on everything you learned from that shell. Well, the end result was any place I go, I'm always looking. Even now when I'm not working, I still have that trained eye, which is such a blessing because it adds a dimension to my life.
Ray, you are truly a self-made man who made your dreams come true, and they were big dreams. You arrived in Los Angeles in January of 1968 and got a job painting scenery at CBS. By 1969, you were working on the Academy Awards show. How did you get so far in 1 year?
Well, what happened is that I knew that I had to work for someone who really was in the top of his field. So I looked around and there was one man who was head above everyone else. After all, he had 3 Emmy Awards. I was very impressed with that. So what I did was I found out that a friend of mine knew this guy, Jim Tritipo. And so I said to my friend Bob, I said, would you have a dinner party for me and invite Jim Tritipo? And he said, sure, no big deal. So came the evening of the dinner party. I made sure that I sat next to him and I turned on the charm, whatever there was of it. And ultimately, I said to him, Jim, I'd love to show you my portfolio. And he said, I don't look at portfolios. And I said, this is the one time I really lied, out and out lied. I said, no, not for a job. I just would really value your opinion, which was BS, because I needed to work with that man because he was the key to opening up doors for me. And so he reluctantly agreed to see my portfolio. And I got to tell you, one thing he got out of 3 years of working for a master's degree, yeah, you came away with a good portfolio and a certain amount of built-in chutzpah. And so basically, I showed him my portfolio. He liked it, but he had no work for me. He had the same assistant, Hub Braden, for 7 years. Hub went on a little hike on a glacier and slipped and spent 3 months in a hospital. And guess who waltzed right in? I have been incredibly lucky that way. I have tried always in my life to set myself in a position where good things could happen. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But basically, I've always tried to be prepared. So it's all about being prepared in life.
You ended up designing the sets for 10 Academy Awards shows. You said that it was high pressure, but thrilling. Did the pressure come from the fact that it was a live show?
It's a combination of things. First of all, you're dealing with a great deal of money, and even bigger than that are the personalities involved. And you're also competing with yourself. I mean, I always wanted to top myself. I wanted to amaze people with what I could do. And, when you're given those sort of toys, you can really do some spectacular stuff. And it was just a wonderful challenge. And I don't know, it's hard to explain. I felt just so lucky to have all these toys at my disposal. It all started with working with Jim Tritipo on the Academy Awards as an assistant. And my job was basically to draft up the show and make models and that sort of thing and be supportive to him. And what happened was, after the show was over, I thought, I have to see what happens upstairs in the press area. So I know this is not answering your question, but I just love the story of it. It was the year that Barbra Streisand won for Funny Girl. And so I went up there to see what the press would be doing and what she would be doing. And she had already gone into this one small room where they had her picture taken, and then the film would be taken out of the camera, rushed down to a man on a motorcycle who would then get it off to the Associated Press. They had no internet really in those days. So it was very, very interesting to see that whole energy level. And what happened was when I got up there, she had already done that, and she was now coming out to meet the press. Now, a rough estimate, there were probably about 100 photographers standing there waiting on bleachers that we had set up for them. And she came out. You're going to love this prop. Pretend this is an Oscar, right? So there is Streisand with her Oscar, and she goes like this, and she aims it at the photographers and goes, ooh, like that. Well, as soon as she aimed the Oscar at them, they took a flash picture. So this Oscar became this magic ray gun of all these flash bulbs going on. It was extraordinary. It was really, really exciting and wonderful. And my book is filled with little stories like that, which hopefully captures a time that isn't there anymore. Everything is quite different.
Yeah, it really is it's a part of Hollywood history, your career, because you did work on so many important shows with so many big stars, and we're going to get into that. I want to ask you, you wrote that to be the best at your craft, you have to be almost obsessed with your work, very focused and highly motivated. That's very, very true. And I would imagine that requires a lot of personal sacrifice, doesn't it, Ray?
It never seemed like a sacrifice. I was so focused. I was going to be the best I could be and hopefully better than anyone else. Well, there's no such thing. There were like maybe 4 or 5 of us who were at the top of our field. And because we were at the top of our field, we weren't competing with each other. We had our producers who were lined with us, who we did. For example, once I did a Bing Crosby special with Bob Finkel, the producer. He hired me for 6 other ones. You just automatically would get those jobs. So there wasn't that sense of competition. But yes, I really drove myself to be as good as I could possibly be. We worked 70, 80 hours a week, and that was normal. It was just, and I was lucky because I had a great partner and he had a good career, and we had a housekeeper. All we did was work and play. None of that stuff in between. I never had to go grocery shopping or go to the dry cleaners or anything like that because I was making really good money and I was focused on that career. And that was what was important to me.
Ray, I want to ask you about some of the great stars that you got to meet and work with. Let's start with Frank Sinatra. You worked on one of his TV specials.
Yeah. Well, this again was when I was starting out and I was working for Jim Chirpo. And Jim was a brilliant, brilliant designer, but he couldn't draw. It was weird. And I was never a brilliant artist, but I could sketch well. And so I was given the job of sketching the sets for that particular show. And we were busy doing a Mitzi Gaynor special. We were doing Hollywood Palace, which was a series. We were busy guys, right? So one day, Jim calls me up and he says, Ray, they've called a meeting with Frank Sinatra on the special, and I can't do it because I'm setting up Mitzi Gaynor. Can you cover for me? Well, I was delighted and terrified because, I was a kid. I was just out of school. So I drove over to the Warner Bros. Lot and was ushered through the gates, and my name was there and told where to park. And then I got directions to Mr. Sinatra's bungalow. And I go in there and I meet this man, this iconic figure. And he was so gracious. He shook my hand and said, I'm so glad to have you as part of the team. Welcome. And we went into a meeting and he said to his secretary, now I don't want any interruptions, no interruptions at all. Well, during the process of the meeting, there were 2 phone calls that he did take. One was from a member of the family. I think it's probably Nancy Jr. But the other one it was really interesting because Sinatra said, okay, yeah, I understand. You tell him that he's a friend. I mean, really an important friend. And anything he needs or wants, he's got from us. And I thought, wow, can you imagine having that type of friend? But then I thought, I wonder what the price tag was on that. So there's all those sort of interesting nuances of it. But anyway, I just adored the man. I was charmed beyond belief. And then, lo and behold, the day of the taping, they couldn't find him. And they finally found him passed out in a parking lot someplace, drunk.
Drunk?
And, yeah, well, hungover by that point, I guess. And they got him into the studio. And fortunately, the first scene that we shot was supposed to be a bachelor pad. So I used to say his blue eyes looked like blueberries floating in tomato juice. He was just so hungover, but it was perfect for the scene. And then we went through the rest of the day. And then the ultimate end was going to be a big concert. And we're talking about a lot of musicians, well over 50 musicians in this elaborate set that we had put together. And he was terrific. In those days, what we would do is we would do a dress and an air. A dress is when you do a rehearsal through with an audience and you do it full out, with the idea that if you run into a problem with the air show, which is the important one, that you can then take a piece out and edit it in and so forth, because it was all edited in that particular case. And what happened was Sinatra, who had this immense ego, did the dress thing. And while he was doing the dress show, there were some very important people all lined up outside the studios waiting to go in. And he announced, "That's good enough. I'm out of here," and walked. And I thought, how can he do that to people? I lost all the respect for him. I mean, God knows he was a major, major talent, but I don't understand people treating other people like that. It's just not the way I was raised.
No, that's a disappointment. You worked on the Dean Martin show, and you said he was the fastest study in the business and almost never rehearsed, and he never drank on the set. That's just amazing.
Yeah, he was extraordinary. He would come in, and everyone had been rehearsing all week long, and he would sit in his little dressing room and watch the monitor. And if there was something complicated as they ran the show through for him, he would go out and learn a soft shoe number or whatever and so forth. And then when we would do a dress and an air, the dress, he'd be as good as anyone who had been rehearsing all week long. And when we did the air show, you couldn't touch him. He was amazing. And what was astounding, because he played golf all week, he had this wonderful tan. He would, at the end of the show, he'd walk off. His man would be there with his coat. He would take the coat, get into his car, and off he'd go. He had no makeup on. He didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. And I adored him. He was charming and good and funny, and he was a delicious person.
Well, for those of our viewers who have not yet seen it, we did interview Dean Martin's daughter, and she echoes everything that Ray has just said. Now, Ray, you designed 7 of Bing Crosby's TV specials, and you described him as quiet, cold, distant, and introverted, and you never got a sense of who he really was. That's just amazing, because you did do 7 of his shows. What do you make of that?
Part of that may have been my fault, because I was raised to respect the talent and to keep my distance. The last thing they need is someone coming up and falling all over themselves with that thing. And that's, unfortunately, I could have had many more experiences. God knows I have a terrific number of experiences, and they're all throughout the book. And from what I hear, they're interesting and delightful to read, I hope.
Oh, believe me, that book is like sitting down at a cocktail party with you and being regaled by this amazing raconteur who has met everybody. But the Bing Crosby episode in your life really surprised me, because he didn't come across that way on screen.
No, he was a really interesting man in that he was very, very devoted to his children, the 3 of them. And it was like he wanted everything for the kids. And Catherine, also, who I adored, also was all about the kids. And I know at one point we hadn't heard, we were in a production meeting, and Bob Finkel, who was producing again, said, "We just heard from the Crosbys, and Mary Frances has been taking ballet lessons." Now, Mary Frances is Mary Crosby, who ended up shooting JR later, many years later, on television. Anyway, she had been taking ballet lessons, and would we do a production number around her dancing? Well, she was a child and had very little training. And we had this wonderful choreographer, very dry sense of humor, Bob Sidney. And everyone looked at Bob and said, "Well, can you do anything?" And Bob said in his dour voice, he said, I tell you what, you give me four strong male dancers and she'll never touch the floor. And what they did was they lifted her from to place to place, and all she had to do was point her toe and make a gesture. And it was delightful, and it was charming, and it was silly.
Now, you also worked with Bob Hope. Have I correctly surmised from your book that you are not a Bob Hope fan?
Bingo. What happened with Bob was that we were hired to design a show called Bing and His Friends. And it was just Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, Carol Burnett, and Pearl Bailey. And everyone was supposed to have equal time. And it's just a week of rehearsal, no big deal. Anyway, first day of rehearsal, everyone was there except Bob. Bob was off doing some charity tournament, golf tournament. And the next day, no Bob, because he had been carried over for the golf tournament. Came Wednesday, there was another excuse for Bob not being there. No Bob Thursday, no Bob Friday. Saturday morning, we're starting to tape the show. And the very first scene is a backstage scene with Carol Burnett and Bob. And so we start the scene, and Carol says, excuse me, who am I doing this scene with? Now, I have to preface this that of everyone I worked with, my absolute favorite in terms of just professionalism and charm is Carol Burnett. I have never heard a one word ever said against her. And so I, like everyone else, adored her. So she's doing this scene, and she said, who am I doing this scene with? And they said, oh, the voice over the PA system, it's Bob Stanton. And she said, well, where is Bob? Oh, he's in his dressing room watching the monitor. And Carol, this is the only time I've ever heard her do anything catty, said, I tell you what, suppose I go into my dressing room and watch my monitor as my stand-in does the scene. Well, big hubbub and so forth. And ultimately what happens is that they drag Bob out and they start to block the scene. By blocking the scene is that they stage it so that the cameras all can get shot, set up and so forth. Anyway, so they're doing this scene, and Bob is frantically looking, trying to read the cue cards, and Carol just has the whole thing memorized. And at one point, Bob said, tell me, Carol, when you do one of these specials, do you always memorize the lines? And she said, of course I do, Bob. I'm a pro. And the crew applauded and cheered and screamed. And Bob was basically wiping egg off his face because he just had set himself up to be such a unprofessional. And I never really liked him for that. I mean, how dare he do that to other people? We all work so hard to make these people look good that when someone didn't do their share, it was insulting.
Well, I have to tell you, Ray, I was surprised at the number of stars who were disrespectful, rude, and unprofessional. You mentioned Lauren Bacall, Jerry Lewis, Pearl Bailey, and Madonna. So I'm going to ask you, why do you think some celebrities behave so badly once they've become big stars?
I think part of it has to do with the fact that it is such a surprise when someone does act badly that it makes kind of for an interesting story. Pearl Bailey was just Pearl. I mean, she was just off the wall. It's hard to explain. She had this huge, big heart, but she had come up from such a rough background. She was working in bars when she was like 15 or 16. And, it was not an easy life. And she had made her life, and she was proud of it, and she was determined to have her way. Sometimes it was gracious and overly generous, and sometimes it was about Pearl. But I admired her. And, for all her craziness at times, and I did her whole series, I mean, it was wonderful. When we put her on a stool and had her just sing, no scenery, no elaborate costumes, you couldn't touch her. She was incredible. The other ones has to do with just bad behavior. I think Madonna is brilliant at promoting herself. I find her talent to be mediocre in my book.
Well, in your book, you described Madonna as a spoiled star, adept at abusing those around her, with a mediocre talent and a great marketing skill, but she does her homework. I think a lot of the bad behavior you saw was a result of insecurity, don't you think?
I don't know. I'm not Madonna. I really don't know. She has a great act at acting like she's in control, but I don't know. I don't know. You know, you just want people to be extra special if you're working with them and you're doing work with it. You want to come up to their level, and you want their level to be very high. And you know, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. I adored Bea Arthur. I mean, she was extraordinary. I never came across someone with such a big heart and so gracious and generous, and actually rather shy, which is amazing.
That is surprising. Tell us about Elvis Presley. You designed his 1973 Aloha from Hawaii TV special. What was he like?
I would like to say, elaborate and tell you a great story about him, but the fact is that he was so protected that I'd never even got close to him. Yeah, we did the show and we rehearsed and all that sort of stuff, but I never had a connection with him. He was incredibly polite, a well-mannered, respectful man, but you couldn't get to him. You know, he had so much protection around him. All his men had little medallions that they wore around their neck on chains that said TCB, taking care of business. And it was all, you could tell how important a person was because if it was either done in silver or gold or in diamonds, that they were ranked that way. And my favorite story about Elvis wasn't directly experienced by me, but was by a producer, Bob Finkel, who I did a lot of work with. And Bob did the first special with Elvis. And Bob had a fabulous hairpiece. I mean, just, you could never in a million years think he wore a hairpiece. And so the first day of blocking with Elvis, Bob took one look at the monitor and he thought, oh, we have a problem here. So he went up to Elvis and said, can I see you in your dressing room? And Elvis said, yes, sir. And they went off. And Bob says, we have a problem with your hair. And Elvis said, we're not touching my hair. And Bob said, you don't understand. It looks like it's been done with black shoe polish or something like that. And Elvis said, well, we're not touching my hair. And it escalated into really a fierce verbal battle. And finally, Elvis said, well, what do you know about hair anyway? And Bob said, this is what I know about hair, and ripped off his piece and threw it on the floor. And Elvis redyed his hair. So, I love those stories that all come out as they're scattered throughout my book.
They sure are, I tell you. Now, you got an Emmy Award in 1976 for designing the Cher show, which I loved. I'm a huge Cher fan. So I've got to ask you, what was Cher like in those days after leaving Sunny and hosting a show on her own? I think she was married to Greg Allman at the time.
You know, you come in there and you beat yourself up trying to top yourself and be as good as you can. And it's difficult. You don't get... I ended up being an observer as opposed to having an interrelationship with someone. And in fact, it's kind of funny because my first day at work on the Cher show, I went around to introduce myself to everyone. And I had worked with most of them, so it was no big deal. But I saved the last one for George Slaughter, who was the producer. And my timing was off because he clearly was interviewing some poor girl who was for secretarial job, something like that, because I can't imagine what it would be like to be in the environment with all these, very pulled together, glamorous people. And here was this girl with matte black hair, a big nose, crooked teeth, and terrible, terrible skin. And then I got introduced to her. She was Cher. I mean, Cher was, mess is not a kind word, but you would never think of her as being glamorous and so forth. And then what would happen is Bob Mackie would do his magic with her, and she would do her own makeup. And in the script, because she has an Indian background, they would say Hiawatha washes her hair. Well, she didn't wash her hair. Someone washed her hair for her. But I remember the first time that she came out of her dressing room, we were about to tape something. She was like about maybe 2.5 feet away from me, flawless. And then the camera, something happened there, and I've never understood it. The camera loved her. And she certainly was a smart cookie. She knew how to work that camera. And it was exciting. I mean,
Did you like her?
I liked the opportunities that she gave me, because you could do anything with her. But I never felt any sort of connection. I think she was going through some rough periods right then. And then ultimately the show got canceled, and that was that.
Well, she has publicly said that she was going through a lot of turmoil then. She was married to Greg Allman. She was not happy having to carry a show on her own and very insecure. And in fact, she went back to doing another show with Sonny, even though they were divorced, which did not work.
So I don't know. All I know is it got me a great deal of valuable experience, lots of stories, and my first Emmy. So, I have no complaints at all.
And you got to know Bob Mackie very well, didn't you?
Yeah, I adore Bob. Bob is, of all the creative people I've worked with, he's at the way at the top. Just a gentleman, cooperative, and brilliant. I mean,
a genius.
Yeah, absolutely. Just extraordinary, man.
Boy, would I love to get him on my show, Ray.
Yeah, well.
Well, another person that you've already mentioned was Bea Arthur. You designed her one-woman Broadway show, which I actually got to see. Now, until I read your book, Ray, I was unaware that she's helped thousands of teenagers who were kicked out by their parents for being gay, something that actually happened to me in my youth. She gave a lot of money to the Ali Forney Center, a long-term housing facility for homeless LGBTQ teenagers. What a wonderful woman she was.
Yes, absolutely. But, that sort of came about because of a couple of people like myself. I had been involved with the Ali Forney Center because I believed in taking care of gay kids. I mean, I too had the experience of being, anyway, I'm not going to even go into that with my father, but the bottom line is that I knew the Ali Forney Center was important in terms of taking care of kids, and I knew that it needed to raise money. And so a couple of us got together, and Billy Goldenberg, who's Bea's accompanist, and her lighting designer, and I got together, and they talked to Bea, because they were much closer to her than I was, and said, would you be willing to do your one-woman show for one night only and raise some money? And when they explained what it was about, she said, absolutely. And suddenly I was in the job. I had the job of being the producer. I had never produced anything in my life, but I'd certainly been around enough. And I figured out how to get free transportation. I had a suite of rooms donated, everything, a driver, a car. We just took really good care of her. And at the end of it, she said, Ray, I had a really good time, and I'm going to leave a little something to the Ali Forney Center in my will. And I said, that's nice. Well, little did we know that she was dying of cancer at the time. And when she passed away, she had left, I guess it was $300,000 to them. And we had also raised, I think it was about $40,000 from the benefit. So it equated to about $1/3 of $1 million. And from that seed money, the California Center got a place donated from the city that had been abandoned, and all sorts of people chipped in. And now they've just grown and grown. That they have, my understanding is they have the Bea Arthur home, named after her, obviously, and they have 2 others that are in the works. So
well, that really touches my heart deeply. I wish there had been a facility like that when I was in need, let me tell you. Now, Ray, are you willing by any chance to tell us about your embarrassing experience in the Hollywood toy store when working on the Hello Hollywood Hello TV special?
God, you would bring that up. Okay. When I got the job designing half of Hello Hollywood Hello for the MGM up in Grand Hotel in Reno, I didn't know quite how to present it. I mean, basically, in our terminology, what I was doing was a tits and feathers show. And all the women were bare-breasted, supposedly, in the show. And I had to do this huge circus finale. And I had this wonderful assistant, Paul Galbraith, who made wonderful models of the circus wagons. And there were 6 of them. And but I thought, how am I going to portray the women on this thing? So I thought, I wonder if there are any anatomically correct dolls. So I went to the Hollywood toy store on a Tuesday morning. I'll never forget this. I was there when they opened the door, so I made sure there was no one there, and I checked, and there were absolutely no customers in the thing. So I worked my way over to the Barbie doll section, and I took one of the dolls, and I took her little sweater and took a look at the breasts. And with that, a woman came around the corner with 2 small children, started screaming, "Pervert, pervert." I had to buy 17 of those damn dolls, which we never used. But anyway, it's just silly, it's just funny.
Yeah, it was. It was one of the funny episodes. Now, Ray, you've written quite extensively about your personal life, and especially your wonderful partner of 50 years, John Harrington. I want to ask you, did you ever experience homophobia in Hollywood?
One time. Just
only once.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? But see, I was in tape television, which was much looser, much more open. In the film industry, there was a lot of homophobia, but not in tape television. And at this one particular time there was a prop man who made some slur about my being gay. And I told my boss, Spencer Davies, who happened to be gay, what had happened. He said, "Oh, I'm going to have him fired." I said, "No, you can't do that, because it will just make him more bitter and more anti-gay." So we just let it slide. But really, one time in 50 some odd years, who cares, It was nothing.
I have to mention that your partner, John, was a highly respected film cutter at Paramount Studios. And in fact, he cut all of Lucille Ball's shows after I Love Lucy. So I've got to ask you, this is coming. What was Lucille Ball like in real life?
She could be funny. She was brilliant. I mean, really, really a smart lady. At one point, we had done Night of 100 Stars or something like that, where at the end, we had this huge bleacher set up so that we could take a mass photograph of all the celebrities and the thing. And she was standing in a row, and about 2 rows behind her and off to the left, maybe by 8 feet, was Jack Benny. And without turning around, she said, "Jack, you're off your mark," meaning he didn't have his proper light spot. How would she know that? She was just very, very bright and very knowledgeable and not very funny. The couple of times I've worked with her, she was not a barrel of laughs. It must have been very difficult for her, because I Love Lucy was a huge, huge hit. And every time after that, she tried but never hit that mark again. And that's a rough way to go through life.
I would think so, yes. You wrote in the book that being a set designer on big productions is incredibly stressful. So many things can go wrong, especially on a live show with a complicated set with many moving parts. How did you keep your cool all those years? I mean, you seem like a very even-tempered guy.
You could never allow anyone to see that you were nervous. You could never show anyone that you were upset or afraid or worried. You just never, and God forbid you could never have a cold or be sick. So, but I never drank heavily, never ever did drugs. All I did was work and enjoy it. So I was very focused that way.
Well, I know you loved your work very, very much. Was it a difficult decision for you to retire?
No, it just sort of happened. What happened was I was with my partner, John, for 50 years. That's a long run. And we had a great, great life together. And I just loved the man. And the last 2 years, he started to fail. He was, 90 at that time. And my whole focus went to taking care of him. And so when he ultimately died, I had not been working for a while. And I found out that I was fine with that. I had nothing more to prove. I had done everything I had ever wanted to do. I had done Broadway, I had done television specials, I had done small off-Broadway shows, I had done everything I had ever wanted. The only thing I never got to do was a big Broadway musical. And so, isn't life terrible? I didn't get to do that. So, no, it was fine. And now I'm just having the most wonderful time because I've got so many adventures ahead of me. I wrote this book, which took me 4 years with a lot of hard work, but I discovered I have an ability to write, to tell a story. And so now I'm sitting down and I'm typing up a novel and I'm loving it. It's such a challenge, and I'm all about challenges in life.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're writing a novel because that means I get to invite you back when the novel comes out
Absolutely.
so we can promote that. Now, Ray, I've got to tell you, when I read that you were in the audience of Judy Garland's legendary 1961 Carnegie Hall concert, I almost fainted. I've always wanted to meet someone who was actually there. Please tell us about that concert.
Well, I was a stupid 19-year-old kid who didn't really know much about Judy Garland, and a friend of mine dragged me to it. And I was like, kind of like, oh yeah, Judy Garland. I got into that theater and never before or after have I ever felt such an electricity running through the audience. It was wild because there was like a buzz going on and she hadn't even come on yet. And then they start with the overture and the place sort of like built. And then she came on and it was like this moment, just a tiny moment where everyone sort of held their breath and she started to sing and she had delivered. And then it became like this fierce battle. We were going to be better than she because she was giving so much to us. And we tried to be it's the only time I've ever been in an audience where you felt the audience wanted to be as good as the performer. It was extraordinary. And when you listen to the record now, it's about 1/10 of the excitement that was that evening. It was extraordinary. I've seen thousands of shows. Nothing has ever come close to competing with that. It's just
wow. That was one of the things on my bucket list was to meet somebody who was at that concert because I play that album all the time. So thank you for telling me about
it. Years later, I'm doing a show called, can't even remember the name of it. It was at Carnegie Hall. It was all these ladies and so forth. And we're setting up the show, right? And everyone breaks to go for lunch, right? There's no one there. And I thought, okay, now's my chance. And I went and I stood exactly where Judy Garland stood for that thing. And I sang full out, happy birthday. And now I can say on my my resume that I sang at Carnegie Hall.
Well, I think it's really amazing that you also ended up designing Liza Minnelli's show at the Palace. That's
Yeah,
something kind of karmic about that.
yeah. She was at the top of her form. It was a pleasure. It was just, she was just wonderful, wonderful. The first time I met her, it was sort of like, oh my God. And out of my mouth came those eyes. They're fantastic. Like I thought, boy, that's really dumb, Ray. She's never heard that before. Ha, but she has the most incredible eyes. And she was gracious and easy. And boy, did she deliver. She gave show after show, just fabulous. I was so lucky because we know that over the years she's had her uneven moments, but boy, I was lucky. But
well, you talk about luck. I have to tell you, I cannot think of anyone who's had more glamorous moments in their life than you. You saw Judy at Carnegie Hall. You watched Ella Fitzgerald rehearse. You've met everybody from Lana Turner to Olivia de Havilland, Betty Davis, Diana Ross, Kenny Rogers, Lauren Bacall, Sophia Loren, Lucille Ball, James Earl Jones, Liza Minnelli, and I've only named a few. Do you ever have to pinch yourself to believe the life that you've lived?
That's a good question. Yeah. I don't know how I got so lucky. I worked hard, but there are many people who work really hard. I was blessed in that I was given one great gift. Don't ask me to learn a foreign language. I was supposed to go to Japan on a Fulbright. I couldn't learn Japanese. Don't ask me to spell. Thank God for spell check. But give me a set and man, I'll nail it. And I will do it really well. And there have been very few times when I've been disappointed in myself. I always aimed high and I always wanted to be even higher, but I was blessed and I was there and it happened. So yeah, that's why that book exists, because it's a history of a period of time that there's not a lot of information about. What happened was I had written one little bit and I showed it to a friend of mine who was an editor, Rebecca Sawyer Fay. And she said, this is really important information. You need to do this book. And I never thought of myself as a writer. I just written this piece because I wanted to. And I discovered that I have a knack for putting these stories down because God knows I've told them enough at different cocktail parties and so forth.
Well, you write like you talk, and that conversational style is very intimate. And when you're reading this book, I felt like you were talking just to me. I could hear your voice.
Oh, that's the best compliment I could ever get. Really.
Well, I really mean it. And I think it's only fair to mention, Ray, that in addition to all of the glamour you've had in your life, you've also had some really traumatic experiences. You almost died in the MGM Grand Hotel fire in Las Vegas in 1980. Your beautiful Hollywood home was badly damaged during the 1994 Northridge earthquake, and your partner, HR, almost drowned. Do you believe in destiny, Ray, that things turn out the way they're meant to be?
I guess. I don't know. All I know is that I've survived beautifully and taken away whatever I've learned from each experience. So, no, it is. You can't expect everything to be perfect and fabulous. The MGM story is, I think, an interesting one in that basically what had happened was I had worked for 2 years doing this show for the MGM Grand. I went to bed that night, and about 7:00 in the morning, I looked up and there was smoke on the ceiling of my hotel room. I was staying at the MGM, and I thought, oh, I'm groggy. And I said, it looks like there's been a party here. And then I thought, wait a second, there's been no party here. What's going on? And there was no one yelling fire. There were no fire alarms or anything like that. I opened the door and it's like a whole different world on the outside. Out in the hallway were people fleeing with half-packed suitcases, looking for a way out of this fire because the hotel was on fire. Down in the casino, it had caught fire. And I went out in my balcony. I had a little balcony with balconies all the way down to the roof of the casino. And there I could see the casino was on fire. I could see it coming along the edges. And I thought, holy mackerel, I'm probably going to be dead in about an hour and a half or however. What are you going to do about it? Well, the great thing about the training that I got was that you never, ever let anyone get aware that you were nervous. You always had to stay focused and solve the problem. And that's what I did. What I did was, I have another little demo here. I took my bed sheets and I tied them into one long rope and I put them over the railing. And I thought, you're not going to like this, Ray, but here goes. And I went over the balcony and lowered myself down, got to the next balcony, pulled the sheets down, redid them, and went down floor by floor by floor. And I was in good shape in those days. I've always gone to the gym, so that was not a problem.
That's incredible. That's just incredible.
But you know what? My training was to stay calm and to find a solution. That's what I did. So that saved my life, probably.
Yes, it absolutely did. You know, I love something you wrote in your book. You said that, I'm quoting you here, when you attack life with an attitude of appreciation, dreams will come true. And I get the sense that you're just so incredibly grateful for the life that you've lived.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a dream and it's not over. I'm going to be, the other day I made up my mind that I'm going to live to 100 because I got so much I want to do. And this book the novel that I'm writing is just consuming me. I just love it.
Well, I'm very, very grateful to you for coming on our show. I've enjoyed every moment of our time together. I'm so happy you wrote this book because it immortalizes an important aspect of the entertainment industry that we really almost never hear about, set design. And you were, and you will always be the best in the business. Thank you so much for being on our show, Ray.
One thing, and good at self-promoting, it is available on Amazon. So your viewers should go to Amazon and look up Behind the Scenes from Hollywood to Broadway. That's how you'll find me.
It was a pleasure to read it, and it was a pleasure to have you on our show. Thank you so, so much for being here, Ray.
Okay. You take care.
Our guest has been the great television and theater set designer and author, Ray Klausen. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneinterviews.com.